If you're still not sure how Jeffrey Epstein relates to the Charlie Kirk assassination or how blackmail or honeypots or that kind of thing work, then you need to watch this episode of my book review of One Nation Under Blackmail and see how the FBI director allegedly was blackmailed by, his penchant for, well, something of a unsavory nature. Let's say that. Watch this episode to learn a little bit about how honeypots work, how Jeffrey Epstein's supposed blackmail on major political figures worked, what he learned from the Israelis, and why that relates to the Charlie Kirk assassination. Check this out, episode number 4, chapter 2 of One Nation Under Blackmail. Now, I have to admit, I'm super excited about this chapter. It is a lot to be read here. I probably grabbed a little bit too much in the beginning because I read so much towards the end of the chapter. We're not even going to probably complete this chapter. In fact, I know we're not going to complete this chapter in this particular episode. Episode 4. Again, this is a whole series on the book that you see on screen here, One Nation Under Blackmail, Volume 1 by Whitney Webb. Whether or not you believe Whitney Webb is a great researcher or not, that's something we can set aside for another time. These are stories that have been circulating in the American public for a long time. Some of you haven't heard of it. Some of you, almost everyone certainly has heard about the allegations that J. Edgar Hoover, former director of the FBI, was a cross-dresser. Almost everybody has heard that. A lot of people will tell you that's hogwash. It didn't happen. It's a weird rumor about the past. This book will document exactly how that happened and put a lot of teeth to it. And again, whether you believe Whitney Webb's account and who she follows the strings on and the people that reported on the whole thing that everyone knew, one of the biggest kept secrets of our government that everybody seems to know. Everyone knew about it, but they still tell you that you're a crazy conspiracy theorist if you ever acknowledge that somebody could have been blackmailed by their penchant for sexual activities and been blackmailed through those. The whole premise of this later part of the chapter gets into rigging houses with cameras and audio equipment everywhere to bring in high-level people to entice them with sexual activities of their favorite nature, be it homosexuality, be it children, whatever the case may be. You provide somebody a safe place to play in areas that they shouldn't be playing, and then you have your whole house and your whole place rigged up with cameras and microphones, and then you blackmail those people and you own the country. You own the people who participated in this. And by the way, I know it's hard to believe, but more people can be enticed by sex than you might imagine. I know it's super hard to believe. Who likes sex? But anyways, apparently a lot of people do like sex and a lot of people have a lot of kinks. And if you happen to be one of those people that they can find your kink, then offer that kink, then blackmail is easy to come by. So watch the steps here. Now we're going to start out very, very early in this chapter by covering a lot of the history about the Bronfman family, and it's going to be related to the Epstein family. And we're going to go Bronfmans through the mob, and then we're going to get to the spicy shit, the J. Edgar Hoover, former director of the FBI, and that's where shit goes off the rails, okay? So bear with us a little bit when we get some of the drier stuff out of the way. It's going to get juicy. It's going to get incredible. And before I do that, I want to make an aside. This does not fit directly into this chapter, but it's an interesting aside, something to sink your teeth into before we get going. There is a long rumor, and again, I won't be able to prove this whatsoever. There's a long rumored allegation that secret societies, for example, use sex, for example, and kinks, for example, to get people under their power. And it's even willingly done at times. What do I mean by that? What I mean is there are rumors. Let's say that you want to be part of a secret society who has big secrets that can topple kings, can topple governments, and you want to be part of that organization because you like the fact that you could have power, right? In order to have power, some rumors say that some of these secret organizations will say, look, you need to provide us some kind of blackmail material on you so that we can ruin you if you ever give up the secrets of our organization. Okay, so how does that work? Well, how about this? I know you don't like children, for example, but should you be willing to pose for a photo with you and perhaps an undressed underage person, whether you like it or not? Once we have that photo, we can ruin you. That photo can surface at any time that we want to ruin your career. And everyone will believe everything we say about you because we've literally got a photo of you that we can compromise you. There are some who believe that people will willingly engage in that form of blackmail. I want the secrets. I'm not really into that kind of thing, but I'll allow you to take a picture of me in a compromising position so that you can ruin my career. That's my leverage to you so that you know I'm going to keep your secret. It's a mutual agreed upon thing. And while I can't prove that that happens, all I can say is think about it logically. Does that not make sense to you? That if you have some big secrets and you want to make sure that, hey, before I tell you my secret, I need to have some dirt on you. Well, I don't have anything that you have on me. Okay, then let me fabricate some stuff on you. Let me give you something that will put you in a very compromised position that you can't argue. And whatever the case may be, I either need to have blackmail on you because you have something and you need to give me something that I can ruin you with. Or if you don't have it, then let me fabricate something for you that I can ruin you with. And only after I can ruin you and we have mutually assured destruction will I allow you to have the secrets that can ruin me. That is just common sense that kind of thing could happen. But here we're going to talk about how it develops when you don't willingly go along with the program, or sometimes do. Check it out. We're going to go to chapter 2, and I'll try to get right into this so we can get going and have a chance to get done with booze and blackmail. Now, we're not going to finish the whole chapter, I will guarantee you, because I didn't actually read the last little bit of this chapter. I only went as far, like, I got over an hour with the stuff, and I try to keep this stuff to an hour. Already I'm picking up the pace, and I'm because I know this early part's going to go a little dry for you. All right, here we go. Booze and blackmail, the Whiskey Men. Per his account, Samuel Bronfman, I told you earlier to listen to Wexner and Bronfman, two big families related to Epstein. It's going to relate all the way down to Jeffrey. It's going to relate all the way down to Jeffrey Epstein. It's going to end up with Charlie Kirk. In my opinion, I'm showing you my logical steps and how I got there. Again, some of this stuff, I'll admit, some of this stuff is kind of like allegedly and rumors have it and so said, and it's a lot of speculation. And so those people who don't want to believe that this kind of stuff happens can just like, oh, that's a lot of rumors and speculation. That's not true. But if you're a critical thinker, you're like, you know what? More than likely, that's probably true. That's where a lot of this is going to be. Can't prove it, but logically, you're like, I see how that could have happened. All right. Per his own account, Samuel Bronfman had never planned to become one of the North America's top liquor magnates. I'm not pronouncing that right. Having previously aspired to a career in law. Nevertheless, true to his family's last name, which means whiskey men in Yiddish, which is Israeli slang type of Israeli conversation. He and his brothers went on to build a liquor empire that would rocket the Bronfmans into upper echelons of Western business elite. Okay, so we're talking about the rise of the Bronfman family. That's the important part you have to go. Then we're going to get from the Bronfmans to another family, and then we're going to get to that to J. Edgar Hoover, and you're going to love that part. All right. A Bronfman biographer, former senior editor at The Economist, Nicholas Faith, would also write that underlying the family's riches was a deep sense of shame as to their origins. They tried to hide the fact that they were Jewish in origin. They tried to hide some of those early things. It was a stigma that they tried to overcome in some regards. Now, at some point in the early 1890s, and by the way, this will quickly get to modern times. So you're seeing all these old dates. You're like, what do I give a shit about that? It doesn't take long. It will not take us long to get to modern day. All right. At some point in the early 1890s, as he sampled spirits which is alcohol, right, in a dingy saloon after selling off some horses, Yechiel Bronfman mulled the merits of leaving behind a life of hard labor in favor of the intertwined business of hospitality and liquor sales, hotels and liquor. Sam Bronfman would later claim that it was actually he who had convinced his father to move into hospitality, the hotel business, and bartending, though most biographers doubt this given Sam's age at the time. So again, this person's saying here's what the rumor is. People already say it's not true, but they're just kind of documenting it. The Bronfmans had saved enough money to lease their first Canadian hotel, the Anglo-American Hotel in Emerson, Manitoba, by 1903. Soon they acquired several more hotels in Yorkton, Saskatchewan, and later in Winnipeg and beyond, building a small yet profitable network of hotels prior to the onset of World War I. The dramatic shift in the family's fortune was largely thanks to the business acumen of Sam's brother Harry, who managed to stave off the financial damage and legal trouble caused by the gambling and other unseemly habits of their older brother Abe. So the family had some bad sheep in the family, and so just kind of the Bronfmans have some good people who are doing legitimate business, buying hotels. They also got some bad seeds. Just kind of just start thinking high level. Don't worry about memorizing all the names. We'll get there quickly to the spicy shit. Notable, however, is the fact that not long after Sam formally became involved in hotel management, the family's hotels were targeted by a series of unfortunate accusations, including when they went to renew their liquor license in Yorktown in 1908. Locals had alleged that the Bronfmans were guilty of violating local liquor laws and condoning illegal gambling in their inns. This is the start of the association of the Bronfman family with underground element, with criminals, gambling element, illegal stuff. This is kind of what you need to get the high level. The Bronfmans starting to have allegations that they're involved with illegal activities. The latter is particularly likely given the well-known gambling habits of Abe Bronfman. One of those black sheep in the family has a big gambling thing. He's involved with the gambling, underworld gambling association, and now the Bronfman family is going to get involved and tied in to mob figures, which were known to have threatened the family business on more than one occasion. So Abe's gambling debts had come to threaten the whole family of Bronfmans, whether they were legitimate or not. And so they started to get tied into the mob in this way. The same year that Sam joined the family's hotel business, the organization that would eventually bring Prohibition to Canada also emerged, the Social and Moral Reform Council. Now, where we're going with this is alcohol prohibition in the United States. This first starts in Canada and then moves across the border into the United States. These families are going to make money, legitimate or not, hotel owners are going to make money and capitalize on prohibition in Canada and as it moves into the United States. And again, this is where they start to become in bed with the mob and with bootleggers and became bootleggers themselves. So, and again, just high level. Don't worry too much about the details, even though I say the devil's in the details on my channel all the time. All right. A joining of the leadership of various Protestant churches, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the Royal Templars of Temperance, and other like-minded groups, the Social and Moral Reform Council was born out of the far-reaching Protestant religious movement of the period known as the Social Gospel Movement that sought to fight social evils, particularly those caused or exacerbated by rapid urbanization and industrialization. So this was the rise of prohibition. A bunch of religious people in Canada in particular were going to fight against the immorals that come along when people drink alcohol and party and revel and do those horrible things. And so that started to lead to prohibition in Canada. The impact of prohibition on Canada's liquor industry was substantial and felt long after it was repealed, with 75% of its breweries having closed by 1928. However, prohibition was conveniently fortuitous for some, the Bronfmans chief amongst them. So prohibition shut down a lot of breweries, but guess who profited? The Bronfmans, because they were tied to the mob, is what the allegation is. Now, author Peter Newman remarked in his biography of the Bronfmans, so this Peter Newman author writes about the Bronfman, he's detailing the Bronfman's family history. Bronfman Dynasty, the Rothschilds of the New World was his book. Quote, sometimes it almost seems that the American Congress and the Canadian federal and provincial legislators must have secretly held a grand conclave to decide one issue: how they could draft anti-liquor laws and regulations that would help maximize the Bronfman brothers' bootlegging profits. So this person, a historian of the Bronfman family and their rise to power, was basically saying it's almost like the American government and the Canadian government are actually passing liquor laws, prohibition liquor laws that somehow always benefit the Bronfman family, who themselves become bootleggers. In other words, the laws passed would somehow shield Bronfman from the very things that are shutting down their competitors. That's the main thing you need to take away. Long-standing history in this country is that our government will go after drugs or organized crime when really that means shutting down their competitors so that the people that they are in business with that are doing the same illegal activities have less competition. So you go after drugs and you're really just going after the competition of those who are selling drugs and protecting the people that you are making money with selling drugs. That's the big picture. If it sounds crazy, wait, and I think you'll become more convinced. And one example, during World War I, the three eldest Bronfman brothers, Abe, Harry, and Sam, exploited the fact that Manitoba and Ontario, while prohibiting the sale of liquor within the province, allowed alcohol to be imported. The brothers set up several mail-order liquor businesses throughout these two provinces and profited handsomely. That is, until the ban on interprovincial trading would go into effect in 1918 with federal prohibition. So again, There was some laws against alcohol, but it somehow allowed Abe, Harry, and Sam, the Bronfman family, to still profit off of importing alcohol. They found a loophole, or somebody gave them a loophole, and they profited during the Prohibition time. And then, of course, Prohibition goes into effect in Canada in 1918, federal Prohibition. However, federal Prohibition also came with a loophole. Federal prohibition also came with a loophole, which allowed alcohol to be sold for medicinal purposes. This prompted Harry Bronfman to create a wholesale drug company that permitted him to import alcohol in bulk and provide it to area pharmacies. Now, on the one hand, you can say, look, that's just a businessman being savvy, right? He's got a business where he sells alcohol when it's legal. When they make it illegal, he's like, how can I still stay in business? I've got all these alcohol things. Oh, I'm legally allowed to sell it to pharmacies, so I'll just move into that. And that sounds like a legitimate business move, and you shouldn't bust the guy's balls for just, and he's trying to do things right? He's playing by the law. Oh, the law makes it illegal for me to sell it on the street, so I'll sell it to pharmacies. Nothing wrong with that. Just a savvy businessman moving his industry into a different area. Maybe so. Let's watch the cookie crumble. So he placed its offices next door to one of the family's ritzier hotels, the Balmoral, and its business model involved offering doctors a bonus for each liquor prescription that they wrote if that prescription was fulfilled by a pharmacy whose liquor was furnished by Bronfman. So now maybe the businessman again is it maybe just smart business, but now they're doing things where they're basically giving discounts to doctors if you use their alcohol. And so now you get into that shady area. And again, some of you out there, many of you out there will say, well, that's just good, smart business acumen. Great for them. There's a fine line between being a smart businessman and starting to break the law when you start having laws passed that make your company the only one who can do certain things. That's where it gets shady as fuck, in my opinion. Now, Canadian writer Mordecai Rickler would later allege that the initial licenses for Harry's new enterprise, named the Canadian Pure Drug Company, was acquired by a well-placed bribe to a prominent politician. Stop there for a moment. Let's read the paragraph again. Canadian writer Mordecai Rickler would later allege, it's just an allegation, that the initial license, the license that was given to Harry's new enterprise, the Harry Bronfman, named the Canadian Pure Drug Company, was acquired by a well-placed bribe to a prominent politician. So is this true, or is it just allegations that the Bronfmans paid bribes to politicians to make their business more lucrative? I would say that's not a stretch of the imagination, but this would say it's just an allegation. And of course, people who don't want to believe that things like this have happened in America and that our country's been taken over by mobsters will say, there's no proof of that, sir. There's no proof of that, devil's advocate. You're stretching. And Whitney Webb, she's just stretching shit. She's just making shit up. She even says it's a legend. But logic tells you that's exactly what's going on. But it gets worse. Other family biographers like Michael Morris called the firm a thinly disguised liquor outlet that soon pumped more whiskey into retail drugstores than any other wholesaler in Saskatchewan. The company also benefited from the corruption of the province's liquor commission, which allowed a percentage of the liquor it seized to be sold back to Harry Bronfman, who then resold it at exorbitant marked up prices. Holy shit. I realize that paragraph's going to go over a lot of people's heads. When you have the law arresting people and seizing alcohol and then allowing the Bronfmans to purchase your seized alcohol from your competitors at a discounted rate and then resell it at marked up prices. Are you following this? This becomes the underpinnings of the law working with the mob, essentially. Although I'm not calling the Bronfmans the mob at this point. Right? So what you're doing is the law goes after your competitors, takes their alcohol, lets you buy it at a really cheap price and then sell it at a really high price, and everybody wins. Shutting down your competitors and letting the people who are doing business with the government make more money. And that makes a fine line between your government being in bed with the mobsters. Subsequent government investigations that were part of a royal commission would further allege that the Bronfman family's drug company was never engaged in the drug business, but confined its activities to the sale of alcohol in the western provinces, adding that the company imported hundreds of thousands of gallons of alcohol from the United States. Of the Bronfman brothers, it had been Sam who was sent to travel across Canada and the United States, which allowed him to build a vast network that included numerous American and Canadian distilleries and bootleggers. This network would, in a few years, provide essential to the Bronfmans, especially Sam, once Prohibition arrived in Canada's southern neighbor, the United States. So when Prohibition moves to the United States, the Bronfmans have set up on the border of Canada and the United States so that they can bring alcohol right into the United States when Prohibition hits the United States. They're setting themselves up in a prime suspect. And while it's hard to follow the logic, already we have allegations that law enforcement, for example, is seizing competitors' alcohol, selling it back to the Bronfmans at a cheaper price, establishing the relationship between law enforcement and nefarious entities. But it gets way stronger. The many friends of Mr. Sam. Beyond the complicity of corrupt officials and doctors, a driving force behind the Bronfman family's Prohibition-era success was their ties, forged by Sam, to the Hudson Bay Company. You probably heard about the Hudson Bay Company. Long a dominant force in Canada's economy, backed by the political and economic elite of England since its founding in the 1600s. Most people in America who went through history class or history classes heard about the Hudson Bay Company and the history and going back to the 1600s. Again, we kind of went backwards, but we will be coming forward very, very quickly into modern times. Trust me. Now, more likely was the fact that the Hudson Bay Company had long been the dominant force in Canada's liquor industry and had every intention of continuing to operate its liquor businesses during Prohibition. The Bronfmans were sure to have caught their attention early on, not just through their mail order business, but because Harry Bronfman had quickly gained a reputation as the king of bootleggers. Harry Bronfman, the legitimate businessman, had become known as the king of bootleggers, who was able to easily skirt the law due to his contacts with corrupt local and provincial officials. Law enforcement was working with the Bronfmans to help them keep their lucrative liquor business going even during Prohibition. And I realize it's complex and I realize it's difficult. All you need at this moment is to focus on the high-level stuff because the juicy stuff comes later. Many of those British distillers boasted close ties to the royal family and England's political elite, like Dewar's. These companies risked losing a considerable amount of income if their ability to export spirits to Canada had been entirely cut off, especially at a time when drinking in England was on the wane. The British government itself was clearly aware of these concerns and made the promotion of exports, liquor in particular, a key policy aimed at offsetting the company's considerable war debts. So Britain's got a decline in alcohol, so they're shipping alcohol to Canada so that the Bronfman family can get alcohol that way. That's another one of these kind of like tie-ins. Direct ties of the company to bootlegging in Canada emerged when British Columbia's Prohibition Commissioner, Walter Findlay, was caught engaging in and profiting from the illegal liquor trade. What? Direct ties of the company's bootlegging in Canada emerged when British Columbia's Prohibition Commissioner himself, Walter Findlay, was caught engaging in and profiting from illegal liquor trade. At his trial, the existence of a, quote, a liquor delivery service run by the Hudson Bay Company, unquote, that sent alcohol to private addresses and spanned the nation, was revealed despite Findlay's refusal to testify. So it came out that there was some kind of weird connection between the Hudson Bay Company bringing in alcohol to Canada through the Bronfmans. And again, I say it a million times. Don't worry if you're getting a little confused. It'll get much clearer as we go, I promise. Soon after the conclusion of Canadian Prohibition, Prohibition went into effect in the United States in January of 1920. The Bronfmans, now largely under Sam's leadership, continued to import American liquor at incredible quantities. So they're bringing in alcohol, they're bringing in liquor across the border from Canada into the United States, but at a much cheaper rate, given that the new law had made it essentially worthless in its country of origin. In Canada, they're not making much money of it, right? So that imported liquor was then mixed with raw alcohol and water. This degradation allowed the Bronfmans to ship a much larger quantity of the liquor than they had purchased back into the United States. Such was the story of the Bronfmans family initial entry into the distilling business. So now the Bronfmans are becoming bootleggers and distillers, bringing in alcohol that's been diluted, tainted, whatever, brought into the United States so they can increase the volume of alcohol coming into the United States. Don't worry if it gets a little bit tedious. We're getting there. The ability of the Bronfmans to secure this deal at the time likely owed to Sam's pre-existent ties to the Hudson Bay Company, which had previously imported many of the brands under which the British Distillers Company Limited. Another potential factor was the chance meeting between one of Bronfman's middlemen, Louis Rosenstiel, and Winston Churchill and 1922. Perhaps you remember the name Winston Churchill, famous name of history. Churchill had deep family and personal ties to the Hudson Bay Company, and from 1919 to 1922, he was in charge of the British Colonial Office. In this capacity, Churchill refused to use the British authority or influence to interfere with the liquor trade in any British colony, including in British-dominated Rum Row, where the Bronfmans were active. So Churchill, who had become friends with the Bronfmans, refused to put any policies in place that would hurt liquor sales where the Bronfmans did business. That's how you do business with the government. Churchill argued that England was not obligated to enforce the laws of another nation and would later call prohibition as a policy an affront to the whole history of humankind. Churchill would later emerge as a key investor in America's post-prohibition liquor industry, which Bronfman and Rosenstiel would quickly come to dominate. What does that mean? After prohibition finally gets lifted in the United States, during that time, Churchill and the Bronfmans are setting themselves up to be major liquor producers when prohibition ends. But they're setting themselves up during the time when liquor and their competitors are shut down so they can get a foothold and they can become bigger. And again, big picture thinking, don't worry about it. I'm trying to get this done, this pre-part, in a half hour so we can get to the really nasty stuff coming up. The stuff that leads to the Jeffrey Epstein, where Epstein learned the blackmailing techniques, and what's leading to Jeffrey Epstein's assassination, in my opinion, or at least has to be factored as one of the major contributing factors. As the Bronfman family's clout in the liquor industry grew after Prohibition, Sam Bronfman would later manage personally to meet Queen Elizabeth II of England, and he would even create a Canadian whiskey called Crown Royal, perhaps you've heard of Crown Royal, to specifically commemorate her visit to Canada in 1939. 5 years later, after creating the successful joint venture with Distillers Company Limited, the Bronfman's Distillers Corporation Limited purchased Joseph E. Seagram's and Sons Limited. Perhaps you've heard of Seagram's liquor. So Crown Royal, Seagram's, these are the big names we still have on our shelves today. This is where it's starting. The merged company became Seagram Company Limited, and Seagram's would serve as the Bronfman family's financial vehicle, not just for their ever-expanding liquor empire, but their subsequent interest in chemicals, oil, and entertainment. Yes, the mob or these families are in pharmaceuticals, oil, and entertainment industries as well. And it starts here, but it gets much stronger over the years. Through his British and Scottish connections, though his British and Scottish connections were important to his and Seagram's success, Sam Bronfman's rise as a global liquor baron also depended significantly on the ties that he had forged, often through his middlemen, with more unsavory actors, namely key figures in North American organized crime. So again, Bronfman's getting connected to organized crime. Many of them were still on the American urban legend, or were still, on in American urban legend, and were discussed at length in the previous chapter, including Charles Lucky Luciano, Mo Dalitz, Abner Zwilman, Meyer Lansky, and members of Detroit's Purple Gang, among others. Much of the Bronfman's early involvement in bootlegging took place across Saskatchewan, North Dakota border. So from Canada, Saskatchewan, Canada, across North Dakota, United States border in boozoriums, where their liquor would be purchased in Canada and then moved to their final destination in the United States, right across the border. So they would bootleg liquor into the United States across the border, where they set up on that border to bring booze in across the border. The bootlegging operation of the Bronfmans would later extend far beyond the Canadian-U.S. border, with the family establishing a warehouse and front throughout the Caribbean and Mexico. They were encircling the main market, the United States, like prey. So they're bringing in liquor from all over the place now, not just across the Canadian border. Of course, with great profit came great risk, and though they avoided major legal trouble for their ties to bootlegging operations during the American Prohibition, it caught up with them soon after. In 1934, the Bronfman brothers were charged with conspiracy, quote, to violate the statutes of a friendly country, unquote, and for evading taxes on liquor that they had exported out of Canada. Now, keep in mind, governments often, one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing, or they fight independently or stovepipe. The government's not all in lockstep. So one part of the government is prosecuting the Bronfmans for their bringing alcohol into the United States, while other ones are looking into the way to make profit out of it. Because again, the government is enormous, and one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing. So in case you're getting confused, well, I thought the government was working with them. Why are the government trying to shut them down? Well, different departments have different agendas. So anyways. Soon after the charges were announced, Sam Bronfman allegedly ordered the destruction of thousands of documents aimed at shielding their early operations from inquisitional eyes. That sounds like obstruction of justice, but anyways. And Bronfman owned companies tied to smuggling, and their assets would mysteriously vanish. As a result, the case against the Bronfmans ran into an insurmountable roadblock, and the four Bronfman brothers were acquitted on all their charges by the summer of 1935. So they were under investigation for their bootlegging operations. So they destroyed all their paperwork and they shut down their businesses, and there wasn't enough information for law enforcement to go after them. And so eventually they were acquitted of all the charges, and they walked away scot-free by burning down and obstructing justice. So, hey, sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. They got lucky. They even managed to settle with the U.S. authorities, negotiating a $3 million settlement with the Treasury Department, a mere fraction of what they had gained during American Prohibition. That part I want to focus on as well. They managed to settle with the United States authorities, negotiating a $3 million settlement with the Treasury Department, a mere fraction of what they gained during American Prohibition. So when they break the law, by the way, a government agency says, hey, how about give us $3 million and we'll stop looking into it. Hey, sounds good. We'll make a settlement. Here's $3 million. Shut the fuck up. We made a lot more than $3 million. Consider it a thank you very much. $3 million is a small piece of the pie. We made far more than that. And everybody feels happy except for the American people. We don't get that $3 million. A government agency gets that $3 million. And it's just so that we can be like, hey, where's our cut of that pie, bitch? Where's our cut of that money? The American people don't benefit from those big payouts, those punishments that, again, they made far more money than they got fined. And when the fine gets paid, it doesn't go to us. We don't get rewarded for that. A government entity who's in bed with the mob gets those kind of payments. It's a sick game. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's keep going. Most of the Bronfman's mob associations during American Prohibition were members of or somehow tied to the National Crime Syndicate. This syndicate, described in detail in the previous chapter, was subsequently defined by the 1950s Senate investigation body, the Kefauver Committee. I think Kefauver Committee. I'm close on the pronunciation, but not quite. The Kefauver Committee. So there was a Senate investigative body in the 1950s called the Kefauver Committee. I'm going to say it like 12 different times, so one of those times we can get it right. That's what we need to focus on. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the Kefauver, or whatever the fuck it is, investigative committee of the Senate, United States Senate, in the 1950s. It's going to be a major part of this. It's going to lead into the Hoover thing. It's going to lead into the spicy shit. It's going to lead into the Jeffrey Epstein shit. So let's start to pay attention a bit more. All right. So let's start that sentence over. Wow, that's a long ass sentence. This syndicate, described in detail in the previous chapter, was subsequently defined by the 1950s Senate investigative body, the Kefauver Committee, as a confederation of organized crime interests that dominated the Italian-American mafia and the Jewish-American mob. Israeli stuff. This is, you pay attention when we're talking about Israeli, you're talking about Epstein's, the Bronfmans, a bunch of Israeli people. That's why people are saying, hey, this has to do with Israel on Jeffrey Epstein, or not, sorry, and on Charlie Kirk today. So pay attention. It's all going to start to come clearer as we move forward. During the Kefauver Committee's investigation, some of the biggest players in the American mafia named Bronfman as a central figure in their bootlegging operation. So mafia members are talking about the Bronfmans being a major part of their bootlegging operations. The ties between the Bronfman family and business and organized crime may explain why some past efforts to chronicle the rise of the Bronfmans were ill-fated. So when reporters and journalists try to write about the rise of the Bronfman family, because it's heavily involved with the mob, is a reason why some of that shit never comes out. Because the mob tends to take care of people talking about, and by take care of people, you know what I mean, tends to take care of people exposing their secrets. Particularly during Sam Bronfman's lifetime. The first person who attempted to write a biography of Samuel Bronfman, Terrence Robinson, had traveled to New York to investigate Bronfmans and their then sprawling corporate empire of Seagrams. And while in New York, he had allegedly concluded the book, but had telephoned a journalist colleague back in Canada distraught. In that phone call, Robinson claimed to have found out things about Sam that he didn't want to write about. Robertson would call a second colleague, stressing that his life had been threatened, and he would and we would know who it was doing the threatening, but that he would do the job himself. After receiving the frantic call and fearing that Robertson's life was in danger, the second journalist called the New York police, who quickly responded, only to find Robertson dying of a barbiturate poisoning to which he succumbed. Robertson's lengthy interviews with Bronfman's were never published, but still exist in manuscript form. What is that saying? A guy says, "Hey, I'm investigating the Bronfmans. I don't want to write about this stuff. It's going to get me killed." Then people get so concerned about that a writer and the stuff that he's going to bring out and his fear of his life that they call the NYPD. And when they go to find him, he's already killed himself. Oh, that's sad. He killed himself. My ass. That guy was murdered because he was going to put out a book about the Bronfmans and their history and their ties to the mob. That's what I'm alleging. And that's what this book is alleging without saying it. How convenient he died of a barbiturate poisoning and succumbed to it when he said, "Hey, look, they're going to kill me for this." And then he dies. But I'm sure that's just a coincidence and there's nothing to see there. Now the Middlemen, and I'm looking at a time where if we're pressed for time, I can get this done in probably an hour and a half, and maybe an hour and a half video. You'll know because you saw it on the thumbnail. Aside from these more personal ties, also crucial to the success of the Seagrams and Bronfman family enterprise during the period were an assortment of middlemen. Two of these were particularly essential to the Bronfman business: Joseph Reinfeld and the aforementioned Louis Lou Rosenstiel. These are two names we're going to want to pay attention to. Rosenstiel is where it's going to get really interesting. I think it's Rosenstiel. Maybe it's Renfield. Shit, I can't remember. One of these individuals we're going to start with, the other one we're going to end with, and it's going to get crazy at the end. Well, all right, we're going to start with Renfield. So it's Rosenstein, I think, who's going to be the other person. Renfield's operation during Prohibition was massive, and so these were the Bronfman's people. So Bronfman, Renfield, and Rosenstein. Just remember those high-level names. It's going to get crazy here in a minute. Renfield's operation during Prohibition was massive and massively profitable for the Bronfmans. Government investigators later revealed that Renfield had imported nearly 40% of all illicit alcohol consumed in the United States during Prohibition. Retired U.S. Treasury agents later testified that the Bronfman family were Renfield's main supplier, while also alleging that much of Renfield's ill-gotten profits had been laundered in Canada, some of it allegedly laundered with the help of Seagram's employees. So the Renfields, again, criminal element involved with the Bronfmans, smuggling alcohol into the United States. That's the key part you need to get. The Bronfmans themselves were known to operate a network of shell companies, some registered to fictitious individuals, people who don't even exist, and linked to a series of both domestic and foreign bank accounts. This network facilitated the family's elaborate money laundering operations, according to Canadian historian Stephen Schneider. The close association between Bronfman and Renfield would later come back to haunt them both, particularly when Renfield's longtime bodyguard, James Rutkin, testified in front of the Kefauver Committee. This is where I said we're going to come back to the Kefauver Committee of 1950s. So Bronfman and Renfield's connection will come back to haunt them during the investigation of the Kefauver Committee in the early 1950s. See how I pronounce it different every time? I'm super clever. One of these times I'm going to get it right. Anyways, Rutkin would tell all regarding the early days of the Bronfman family business, including the relationship of both Bronfman and Renfield with mobsters like Zwilman and Lansky. Some Bronfman family biographers, like Nicholas Faith, had alleged that Rutkin sought to use his testimony in a failed attempt to blackmail the Bronfmans, threatening to reveal more if he was left uncompensated. Among Rutkin's claims regarding the Bronfmans, several pertained to the family's hotel businesses in Canada that had preceded the liquor empire. Rutkin described the Bronfmans as four brothers from Montreal, teased at the Kefauver Committee, stating first that if you want to find out more about the Bronfman hotels, you can ask the Canadian Mounted Police. And they will tell you about the little hotels, and you can use your imagination. He later added that these hotels serviced people who slept very fast, and that some rooms would be rented quite a few times during the night, implying that the hotels were in fact brothels. So where's it all coming? When a Senate investigation into this criminal activity comes up, they're talking about the Bronfman's hotels, the legitimate hotel industry that they ran, that seem to have customers who like to sleep fast, i.e. rented by the hour, and left and rented that same hotel room multiple times because they were running brothels. And if you want to know more about that, this person alleges to the Senate committee, you could ask the Canadian police, because law enforcement and the criminals are in bed with each other. Nevertheless, in the early 1950s, at the time of the Kefauver hearings, the Bronfmans alleged that Rutkin's claims were absurd. That's absurd. and they declined to pony up any of the hush money that Rutkin was rumored to have been seeking. Yet, despite their best efforts, Rutkin's testimony, which received considerable publicity, lots of people heard about this, due to the televised broadcast of the hearings of the Kefauver committees, created a whirlwind of rumors that refused to be snuffed out for some time, at least until Rutkin turned up having been killed or dead, having allegedly slit his own throat with a borrowed razor from 1956. Oh, that's a shame. People really, really get depressed when investigating the Bronfmans or turning on the Bronfmans and organized crime and law enforcement that helps them out. And so he's talking about the Bronfmans. I'm going to expose you all. And then he just somehow decides to slit his own throat with a borrowed razor in 1956. That's very nice. All right. So the chairman. Okay, I'm behind schedule, but we're going to keep going. While Sam Bronfman struggled with his would-be biographers, like people try to write about the Bronfmans and they just don't seem to be very successful. People don't have a lot of success writing about the Bronfmans. No biography was ever written of his one-time middleman and later chief rival, Louis Rosenstiel. Now we're getting to the shit. This is going to be the shit as we end up here. Okay, so not a lot of writers write about Rosenstiel. So when we get into this thing and you hear people say, oh, you devil's advocate, that's not substantiated. That's because people tend to slit their throats or overdose on drugs when they investigate this shit. That's what happens. When you investigate this shit, you tend to just kill yourself or have an accident. So yeah, not a lot's been written about it. And of course, then the thing is like, well, yeah, there's nothing going on here. Like people just fucking die. That just happens if it's just coincidental. Nothing happened, but people who write about it just die. All right, let's get into the fun. Years later, James P. Kelly, chief investigator for the Interstate and Foreign Commerce Committee of the New York House of Representatives, testified under oath that Rosenstiel, an associate of the Bronfmans, had been part of an underworld consortium that bought Bronfman's liquor and sold it throughout the United States during Prohibition. So this is testimony in the New York House of Representatives, testifying under oath about Rosenstiel's association with the Bronfmans selling illegal liquor during United States Prohibition. Key figures in the consortium, aside from Rosenstiel, included Meyer Lansky, as well as Joe Fusco, an associate of Al Capone, Joe Lindsay, and a Boston-based criminal association with Joe Kennedy's bootlegging operations. Kelly added that Rosenstiel was particularly close with Lansky, and it later emerged that they had owned points together in mob-operated businesses. So they had ownership in mob-oriented businesses. He also was reportedly close to Frank Costello, who was also said to have attended a business meeting alongside Rosenstiel to give the meeting's attendees a message that Rosenstiel was one of their people. It's just mob ties, a lot of mob names. Mob names that we heard in the previous chapter, mob names, Rosenstiel, Bronfman's, mob names all together because they're all intertwined. They're all doing business together. That's the key takeaway as we move forward. One of Rosenstiel's ex-wives, this is where it starts to get off the hook. One of Rosenstiel's ex-wives, Susan Kaufman, later told journalist Anthony Summers that, in Summers' words, living with Rosenstiel was to live with the command structure of organized crime. Kaufman's testimony to Summers includes numerous specific and very detailed allegations of the various meetings between her ex-husband and organized crime figures that she witnessed during their marriage, including business meetings where Rosenstiel was given thousands upon thousands of dollars and bundles of cash from Lansky. After Prohibition, Fusco and Lindsay took their operations into legal and legitimate business world, just as Rosenstiel had done. Now, sure, they make some mob money and then they eventually go legit, but the criminal underpinnings of legit businesses have already been long established. So if you think that the criminal enterprise thing is gone, no, it's just that we've gone looking legit. We look like we're doing things legally now, except for you're still friends with all of the mobsters, as we will see. They set up legitimate companies in Chicago and Boston, respectively, to market Shellney products. Sheenley products. There you go. I'm pronouncing that wrong as well. As a result, Rosenstiel maintained his links to the criminal underworld long after publicly transitioning from bootlegging to businessman. So again, what I just said, even though they're going legit, they still have all their ties to the organized crime. Frequent dinner guests at Rosenstiel's home in the years and decades after Prohibition included legendary figures of American organized crime, including Frank Costello, Sam Giancana, Santo Trafficante, Meyer Lansky, and Lansky was known to address Rosenstiel as the Supreme Commander, a name that Roy Cohen, Rosenstiel's attorney, and close friend, also used for the liquor baron. So again, during Prohibition, they were bootleggers. Then they went legitimate, but after they go legitimate, they're still having dinner parties with big names in organized crime, like Giancano and Traficante and Lansky and Costello. All the big names in mob are still dinner associates with them, even though they've gone legit, too legit to quit. And now, the coup de grace. Though both men had legendary tempers and a legendary feud to match, Bronfman and Rosensteel had major differences in their character, particularly in how they managed their respective business and in their personal lives. One of these differences was the fact that Sam Bronfman did not share Rosensteel's obsession with blackmail. This is where we're going to lead into blackmail, blackmail, blackmail. One Nation Under Blackmail, the title of this book. Jeffrey Epstein allegedly had blackmail on U.S. politicians, working with Israelis to get blackmail on U.S. politicians. And that is probably why when people like Charlie Kirk are trying to say, hey, let's expose who was doing business with Epstein, who was on Epstein's books, who went to Epstein's brothels, who had sex with Epstein's underage girls, who in our government is in bed literally with the Epsteins and the Israelis intelligence, who have been running a honeypot to lure in American heads of figures and get dirt on them. And you know what just happens when people keep pushing for those names that include names like allegedly Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and many others? What happens when somebody pushes for those names too much? Crack! They get shot and killed. Things happen. Shit happens. That's where I'm going with this in my mind. Now, again, there are many reasons for Charlie Kirk to have been assassinated. This is just one of them, but it's the one that intrigues me the most because I've been following the Jeffrey Epstein connection for quite a long time. Indeed, reports of Rosensteel's behavior at his company offices, also cited by Nicholas Faith, included Rosensteel having placed bugging devices throughout his offices. Rosensteel placed bugging devices throughout his offices. Per Faith, he would treat his employees like dirt, sacking them at a moment's notice, and then go to the toilet to leave them time to compromise themselves by talking in his absence. So he would get them to talk about secrets or whatever when he was stepped away, but he's recording their conversation. His entire house is rigged up with cameras and video and audio recording information. This allegedly is the same thing Jeffrey Epstein was doing. He would lure people into doing illegal things at his mansions and his private places, thinking that he's your friend and he's providing you, hey, look, I won't tell anybody. In fact, I'll provide you an underage girl or whatever it is you're into. I'll provide that to you. I got your back. And then secretly his entire place, they were dumb enough to go there and do these illegal activities. That entire place was bugged everywhere and he was recording it and he had blackmail on everyone. That's at the heart of what I believe was happening. It's the reason why Jeffrey Epstein had to kill himself, because if it would have come out who he has blackmail material on, and if he decided under trial, I'm not going to jail for the rest of my life as a pedophile, I'm going to turn all you motherfuckers in. I got videotape on you. That wasn't going to be allowed to happen. Jeffrey Epstein was never going to be allowed to broker a deal for himself and get himself out of the whole allegation that he's a pedophile. And so therefore he had to accident himself in order to take care of that problem, to shut his mouth. That's where I'm going with that. In my opinion, it's my opinion. All of this is opinion. This entire place has a little disclaimer at the beginning. This is not facts. These are opinions and commentary based on facts, but it's commentary. Those employees were compromised as their conversations were recorded by the devices that Rosensteel had strewn about his premise. This is the same thing I believe Jeffrey Epstein was doing in his places. Bugging the entire place, recording people, heads of state, all kinds of powerful people, compromising them and having them say things under while they're being recorded. And that's used as blackmail. Additional assertions made in court and under oath, by one of Rosensteel's ex-wives held that Rosensteel had also placed microphones throughout his home in order to record conversations that took place at social events that he hosted for the alleged purpose of obtaining blackmail against his guests. That's the same thing Jeffrey Epstein was doing, in my opinion, along with his madam, Ghislaine Maxwell. They would entice high-level businessmen and politicians to come to their house for private parties, sex parties often, private parties where things would just happen behind closed doors under their protection, or on Jeffrey Epstein's private island outside of any jurisdiction of any country, so that whatever happens there isn't against the law, because law isn't allowed to go there. Laws don't apply on a private island, is what the idea is. And so that's what he was doing, enticing people, high-level guests, to participate in his sex parties, allegedly. And this Jeffrey Epstein learned from the Israelis who were in bed with the Bronfmans, who blackmailed the FBI using the same tactics. All of this leading to who's been blackmailed in U.S. politics today. In addition, several sources reported to the 1971. Holy shit, we're quickly getting up to modern times. Now we're in the 70s. We're moving quickly. In addition, several sources reported in the 1971 New York State Legislative Committee on Crime that Rosensteel's Manhattan home had been wired from roof to basement with hidden microphones so that they could spy on visitors and staff. The system in Rosensteel's home had been installed by Fred Otash, an infamous private detective who had used electronic means to spy on Kennedy's family, Marilyn Monroe, and others. Otash later, Kennedy, remember the rumors about John F. Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe and their affair and all this like that? That this Otash individual had rigged up cameras to try to capture that, the association between Kennedy, President Kennedy, and Marilyn Monroe, and others. Otash later said that Rosensteel's home was rigged to tape conversations for hours on end. Otash had a penchant for blackmail himself, particularly sexual blackmail. He had once attempted to entrap John F. Kennedy using a call girl named Sue Young in the lead up to the 1960 presidential election. So these people have a penchant for luring political figures into sex enticements. I know nobody really likes sex, so I don't get why people keep falling for this. But hey, look, I got this pretty girl. You like this type of girl? I've got this type of girl for you. I'm going to hook you up privately, wink, wink, nod, nod, unbeknownst to you. That favor comes at a cost. I'm going to record it, and then I'm going to say, hey, by the way, sure would be a shame if your wife in America found out that you were cheating on her with this chick, Sue Young. And so that's how blackmail works. You pretend to be their friend, you get them to do something unsavory, you get it recorded, and then you're like, man, it would be a shame. By the way, if you start doing that shit, that's how you get killed. So you better be really, really good at your blackmail, because that's how people get killed. As we'll see shortly, Rosensteel was also involved in a broader effort to obtain this variety of blackmail, which may explain why he had sought out the California-based Otash to bug his New York home. So Rosensteel is learning how to bug his offices and take a page out of this Otash's book for trying to blackmail political figures. This is leading to what Jeffrey Epstein does. Some of these sources that discuss Rosensteel's interest in blackmail also claim that Rosensteel was bisexual. Why does that matter? Well, it does eventually. You'll see. One's sexual preferences don't much matter to me. I'm not making a statement about homosexuality, bisexuality, and at first you read this like, oh, why are you making a big deal about bisexuality? It matters when you're telling the story about who's afraid of that coming out. One of the things that, by the way, that's true in security and having clearances is the government less cares about what you've really done. They care about what you're afraid of being found out. If you are afraid of your secret coming out, then you're a risk because you'll sell secrets in order to keep your secret. So the government doesn't like people. It's not so much that they don't like people who do bad things. They don't like people who do bad things and are afraid of it coming out, because it's the afraid of coming out part that lets you be blackmailed, which is exactly why we use those techniques in this country to blackmail people, or any country for that matter. Why blackmail exists in the first place. If you've got something you'd be embarrassed to come out with, that's how I get blackmail on you. According to Nicholas Faith, discussions about Rosensteel's bisexuality among Shenley's office employees were frequent enough for Rosensteel to be referred to as Rosie around the office. So they knew he was a bisexual, and they jokingly referred to him, Rosensteel, as Rosie. Additional evidence for these claims later came from Rosensteel's fourth wife, Susan Kaufman. Per Kaufman, whose previous marriage had collapsed because of her first husband had been homosexual, she soon discovered that she had made a similar mistake in marrying Rosensteel. So this woman had married a man who turned out to be homosexual. Then she got divorced and she got remarried and whatever. And now she's ended up with another guy who's bisexual. And she's like, wow, I made the same mistake. I keep marrying these men who like men. Okay. Rosensteel was reportedly uninterested in having sex with his new wife, but went to great expense to have her dress up in clothes that made her look like a little girl. Oh, shit. Now, here we go. So Rosensteel, who's in with the Bronfmans, likes men, not a big deal, but now he wants his wife to dress up like a little girl because he's not interested in actually a male-female traditional relationship. It's got to have some kind of element to it, I guess, right? So now he wants her to dress up like a little girl. Allegedly, these are allegations, but it's under testimonies, by the way. He would later be discovered to be in bed. This guy, who wants his wife to dress up like a little girl and likes men, he would later be discovered in bed with one of his lawyers, Roy Cohn. We talked about him before, and shrugged it off to his wife by asking for some more alone time with his attorney. Hey, honey, can you shut the door? I need a little bit more alone time with my attorney. Kaufman, his wife, remembered responding, huh, I've never seen Governor Thomas Dewey in bed with you, as Dewey was one of his attorneys at the time, and she walked out. So you need some more time with your attorney, or that you haven't seen you with your other attorney in bed like this, but okay. Kaufman remembered the young Cohn, who was best known for his infamous stint as Joe McCarthy's chief counsel during the height of the Red Scare, as flaunting his homosexuality whenever he was around Kaufman, openly caressing a former congressional associate in front of her, and describing the homosexual antics of a close friend of his and Rosensteel's. Cardinal Spellman, one of the most powerful figures in the Catholic Church in North America. Oh my God. So here we go. Now we have religious figures being called out. Cardinal Spellman, most powerful figure of the Catholic Church in North America, who is allegedly a homosexual. And they talk about Cohn and Rosensteel about how, yeah, Spellman from the Catholic Church is also homosexual, like we are. We love homosexuals. And that's okay. I'm not busting homosexuals. Please understand. That's not where I'm going with this. But when you're afraid of that shit coming out in the public, because in a different era, that was a major, major problem, that's a secret that needs to be kept. Cohn was reportedly so open with her because her first husband had been gay, and I must have understood because I stayed with him for 9 years, Kaufman later stated. So in other words, this person wasn't so afraid of telling her about his gay associations because she had been married to a man who was openly gay before, and she stayed with him for 9 years. So she must be okay with that. And so he was a little bit liberal telling about his gay exploits. And again, this is not an indictment against homosexuality, nothing about that. Keep in mind about who doesn't want those secrets to come out, who they're okay knowing about it, and who they're not okay knowing about it. That's the essence of blackmail. In 1958, Kaufman accompanied her husband, Louis Rosensteel, to a party. This is where it's getting nuts. It's going to get nuts fast. In 1958, Kaufman accompanied her husband, Louis Rosensteel, to a party hosted by Cohn, his attorney, at the Plaza Hotel in New York. Kaufman recalled entering through a side entrance and taking an elevator to the second or third floor. Her husband knew the way well enough that she had the impression that he had been there before. The suite was one of the largest available at the hotel and was all done in light blue. Biggest in the hotel. The best suite in the hotel is reserved for these, well, we'll find out to be sex parties. Inside the suite were Cohn and another figure closely associated with both Cohn and Rosensteel, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Oh, shit. Oh, shit. Oh, shit. So here we go. The allegations that the mob tied with and having blackmail on the FBI director in the United States, J. Edgar Hoover. And when you have blackmail on the FBI director, what can you get away with? Let's continue pulling this thread and see how fun this gets. So at the party is FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Allegedly. All of this shit, by the way, if you talk about it, if the wrong people talk about it, they just end up dead or suicided because things happen. People get weird when they start telling this story. So again, those who want to shut it down, oh, devil's advocates, that's pure speculation. Yeah, you're right, because everybody gets killed if they talk about it. I get it. It's pure speculation. You know what? I'm just speculating too. And hope I don't have an accident. But at least I have it on record that I was talking about it. And so when I have that accident, some of you can be like, man, devil's advocates probably didn't have an accident. But you know what? Football's on. I'm going to go watch that. I get it. All right. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Okay. To Kaufman's surprise, Hoover was wearing women's clothes and a wig, with Cohn introducing him as Mary, and a bout of barely concealed laughter. Yes, rumors in this country have long abounded that the FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was a cross-dresser and that they had blackmail on him. He was a homosexual cross-dressing director of the FBI, and that compromised him, and that the mob had blackmail information on him. That rumor has been around in this country for a very, very long time. This book is just simply documenting some of that in writing to tell you where the rumor came from. It's not just rumor, as I would say, or she's saying in here, but some of you will still say, oh my God, that's completely dispelled rumor. Never happened. And anybody who talked about it happening has an accident. All right. So Mary was also incidentally the nickname widely used among New York Catholic clergy for Cardinal Spellman. So Hoover, dressed in women's clothing, they refer to as Mary, also the same name they would call the Cardinal of Spellman of the Catholic Church, Mary, a name that they would also call him because they liked this cross-dressing thing, whatever, right? who is also alleged to attend parties hosted by Cohn at the Plaza's Blue Suite. So the Blue Suite is where these sex parties happen. They dress up like women, they have sex with other men, all these different things. And we have the FBI director and a cardinal of the Catholic Church in with the sex parties. And I realize some of you in America cannot believe that really happened. Didn't happen. That sounds like complete wild speculation. Men of God certainly don't dress up like women and have sex with other people. That doesn't happen. FBI directors certainly aren't going to do something like that. It's complete allegation. And anybody who says otherwise can go have an accident. All right. After being served a few drinks, Kaufman recalled seeing a couple of boys come in, young blonde boys. I'd say about 18 or 19. Okay, so let's relax. The boys thing, we're not talking about underage boys here, 18 or 19, they're legal, but some young boys, because these are older men. They're certainly much older than 18, 19-year-old boy quality. These are probably men in their 40s, 50s. I don't know how old they were at this point. But anyways, point being, probably a little too old for 18 and 19-year-old men. But again, let's put the boys thing aside. It's not children. And then Roy Cohn makes the signal that we should go into the bedroom. Sexual activities between the young blonde boys, Cohn and Hoover, ensued. Hoover, director of the FBI, having sex with young men. I don't want to say boys. That kind of like makes it sound different than it is. Has sex with young men, according to this allegation from Kaufman, who's basically telling a lot of this story. Kaufman declined to participate after being urged to do so by her then husband. Hey, come join us. I think I'm going to pass, she says. The Rosensteels then left, leaving the boys alone with Cohn and Hoover to do their thing. Cohn later laughed about the incident to Kaufman, saying that Mary Hoover attends his parties regularly and that he would make sure to arrive at the plaza first when his clothes, the female clothes allegedly used by Hoover at the parties, in a suitcase. So they're joking about how the FBI director comes there regularly and dresses up in women's clothes and they call her Mary. Per her testimony, Kaufman was repulsed by the whole affair, but ended up attending another of these parties at the plaza after Rosensteel bribed her with an expensive pair of earrings from Harry Winston's. By the way, here's the perfect example. This kind of thing happens in America. It convolutes things. Oh, if she had such a problem with it, then why did she go to multiple parties? This is why. She was promised a very expensive pair of earrings. And so like, maybe I'll look the other way because I really like that earrings and I can't afford it. It's probably like 10 times my salary. So I'll just go to another party. I don't have to participate, but I'll go. But somebody who wants to do the whole, oh, well, she's full of shit. She was at those parties. So nothing like that could have happened. She willingly went to those parties. Yeah, because she wanted some earrings. It gets convoluted when you get into that kind of shit. The events of that evening played out as they had the time before, but the Rosensteels later quarreled and she never attended any more Cohn host parties at the Plaza Hotel. These allegations made by Kaufman resulted in considerable efforts to discredit her testimony, especially during the 1971 New York State Legislative Committee on Crime. Kaufman had agreed to serve as a witness for the state regarding her ex-husband's ties to organized crime. The very week that she was due to testify, Kaufman was hit with an attempted perjury charge that was regarded as unprecedented and bizarre by lawyers and outraged the committee's chairman and chief counsel. In other words, bogus charges were brought up against her before she was going to testify about what was happening in those blue rooms, or the blue room, the blue suite. Kaufman still testified, even despite the fact that she was being slammed with trumped up allegations to try to stop her testimony. Kaufman still testified it, but mostly behind closed doors in an executive session. Her testimony several decades later still remains sealed. So while she gave her testimony, they have sealed that, probably under the guise of national security. National security. Why national security? Because we don't want the nation to know that J. Edgar Hoover was a cross-dresser who had sex with males in front of people and that was blackmailed by the mob back in the day. That would be a matter, that legitimately, folks, is a matter of national security. Because if the country finds out that your FBI director has been compromised and owned by the mafia because they have blackmail material on him, some people would want that FBI director removed. And that's a matter of national security. I get it. Members of the committee believed at the time that the attempted perjury charges had been instigated by Louis Rosensteel himself, and in order to prevent his wife from testifying, as he had previously used similar tactics to protect his corrupt dealings. This attempted perjury charge has since been used by some authors to discredit Kaufman's later testimony regarding her ex-husband and his associates. So in other words, they're saying that attempted perjury charges is something that her own husband basically brought against his wife to keep her from testifying and to keep it hush hush. It's a tactic he's used before. And so people use the fact that she had perjury charges levied against her as you can't listen to anything Kaufman says. So when Kaufman tells you that the FBI director is a cross-dresser that goes by Mary and has sex with men, that all can be thrown out the window because she's a criminal. She's perjured herself. She's a criminal. Can't listen to anything she says. Worked brilliantly. However, the former chief of counsel of the crime committee, New York Judge Edward McLaughlin, and committee investigator William Gallinero found Kaufman to be exceptionally a good witness. McLaughlin later told journalist and Hoover biographer Anthony Summers, "I thought of her absolutely truthful. The woman's power of recall was phenomenal. Everything she said was checked and double checked, and everything that was checkable turned out to be true." Additionally, evidence corroborating Kaufman as a witness came from two male witnesses who supported the astonishing allegations of Hoover's habit of cross-dressing, with those witnesses having learned of the former FBI director's habits at a different time and place than the events described by Kaufman. In other words, other people knew J. Edgar Hoover was a cross-dresser involved in these kind of things. It didn't have to just come from Kaufman. Other people verified what Kaufman said. Yeah, we all know about Hoover's cross-dressing activities. It wasn't just Kaufman, but they're going to tie all that rumors in America about the cross-dressing FBI director is all this woman and she perjured herself, so she can't be believed. I'm surprised she didn't have an accident, or does she? Oh, we'll see. Anyways, they also had no knowledge of Hoover and the Blue Suite parties in New York. In addition, Kaufman told Attorney Summers that she possessed photographs. Kaufman told Anthony Summers she possessed photographs showing Hoover in the company of Louis Rosensteel's organized crime associates. So she had pictures of them partying with mobsters. Though Summers did not see these pictures personally, they were confirmed as authentic and have been seen by journalist Mary Nichols of the Philadelphia Inquirer. So journalists have seen the photos of her husband with mobsters. Nichols told Summers that she did have a suitcase of photographs that she had hauled away from her marriage to Louis Rosensteel. The ones I saw showed Hoover, lawyer Roy Cohn, and Rosensteel at all sorts of social events with mobsters. So allegedly, there were a bunch of photos seen by reporters at the Philadelphia Inquirer, as one of them, have seen the photos of Hoover and crime associates and Rosensteel and crime associates, all linking all these people with mobsters and in our organized law enforcement, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. There was also evidence that not only did these parties at the Plaza Hotel take place, but they were used to obtain sexual blackmail with Kaufman asserting that her husband possessed pictures of Hoover wearing women's clothes and that those images had been passed to Rosensteel's associate mobster, Meyer Lansky. Journalist and author Anthony Summers also noted that given Rosensteel's interest and ability to have his residence and house businesses bugged, Rosensteel was quite capable of having sex sessions at the Plaza bugged and arranging for Edgar to be photographed in his female costumes. So what they're just saying is, look, these reporters know this is something Rosensteel did. He liked to set up locations where he had cameras hidden and stuff. So he probably did have photos and video of Hoover in women's dress having sex with people. So they're alleging all those photographs, those rumors of the photographs are true. I bet you a lot of people died to keep those photographs out of the public. In addition, New York attorney John Klotz, tasked with investigating Roy Cohn for a case well after Kaufman's testimony, independently found evidence of the Blue Suite at the Plaza Hotel and its role in sex extortion ring after combing through local government documents and information gathered by private detectives. So in another investigation completely unrelated to the allegations of Hoover and the Blue Suite, Roy Cohn has been investigated, and during that investigation, they found more evidence that there is such thing called a Blue Suite at the Plaza Hotel, where a sex ring was rung, and that they had information of that happening. So the story checks out. There was a Blue Suite. There were sex parties. The only thing that they're saying didn't happen is J. Edgar Hoover wasn't there cross-dressing as a woman, but probably was because everything else checks out. It allegedly involved minors as well as young men aged 18 and older. Klotz later summarized his findings, telling the journalist and author Burton Hirsch, Roy Cohn was providing protection. There were a bunch of pedophiles involved. That's where Cohn got his power, from blackmail. Yes, blackmail elevates you to really high levels in government, because if you have dirt on everybody, you get to hobnob with the powerful elite because you've got dirt on them. All right, so we're after an hour. We're going to try and get this done in about 20 minutes. I told you this was the good shit. This should be the good shit. This should be the fun stuff. I hope you're enjoying it. Further, Confirmation of Rosensteel's and Cohn's activities in the Blue Suite, later determined to be Suite 233. That's a number. That's a number for you. Anyways, I'm going to put that aside. Later determined to be Suite 2. Oh, I almost can't let it go. Later determined to be Suite 233 comes from statements made by Cohn himself to former NYPD detective and ex-head of the department's Human Trafficking and Vice-Related Crimes Division, James Rothstein. Here we go. Statements made by Cohn to former NYPD detective and ex-head of the department's Human Trafficking and Vice-Related Crimes Division, James Rothstein. Rothstein later told DeCamp, a former Nebraska state senator who investigated the Franklin scandal of the 1980s, well, we're closely approaching modern time, that Cohn had admitted to being part of a bisexual blackmail operation targeting politicians with minors during a sit-down interview with the former detective. Once again, the allegations behind Jeffrey Epstein and what he was doing was he was running sex parties for high-level politicians, getting them to compromise with underage girls. Not because Jeffrey Epstein himself was the horrible pedophile that just like little girls. He was providing services for people in government so that you can get blackmail. And his places were rigged with microphones and cameras to get blackmail and dirt, which is why we in this country are fighting so hard to keep the list from coming clean. We'll suicide Jeffrey Epstein in prison. We'll put Ghislaine Maxwell in jail for good. And then we'll have Congress say, hush the tapes or the books. Don't show everybody who actually went to Epstein's places. We don't want that shit to come out. That's a matter of national security. Well, no shit. No shit. Rothstein told DeCamp the following about Cohn. Cohn's job was to run little boys. Say you had an admiral or a general or a congressman who did not want to go along with the program, Cohn's job was to set them up, and then they would go along. Cohn told me that himself. So even if you weren't into little boys, Cohn would use little boys and somehow get compromising information or pictures of you and a little boy so that he can use that as blackmail. That was his job. His job was to get them to go along with the program. And if they didn't, then he'd find a way to do that so that he could use little boys to blackmail admirals, generals, congressmen, anyone who didn't go along the program. They would use little boys to try to compromise them. Rothstein later told Paul David Collins, a former journalist, by the way, as an aside, please be careful in America whenever you hear somebody accused of something that you don't immediately jump on the bandwagon of calling them every name in the book and saying, I hope somebody shoots that guy in the head because he's been accused of it. Because again, these people, according to this paragraph, didn't even want to do those things. And when they didn't, they were subjected to it anyways. Because once you get labeled something, your life is over. It's forfeit. Because Americans are too fucking sheeple to do research themselves and think critically. Oh, you've been accused of it. You must have done it. Holy shit. That's exactly why this works. It's because even if you're not into it, all they have to do is accuse you of it. And half of America or over half of America will be like, shoot the guy in the head. He's been accused of playing with children, whether he did it or not. Do some research. Think about it a little bit. Make sure that someone isn't blackmailing them. It's the oldest trick in the book, the most powerful, because most Americans just completely check out in their mind when kids are involved. So what better form of blackmail? It doesn't mean that people aren't doing that, because people are legitimately blackmailed by that because they do like that kind of thing, some people, but some don't, and it's still used against them. So make sure when you're calling people horrible names that you've actually thought about it a little bit and made sure that that's really what they are, and that you didn't jump on the narrative because they know you're too stupid in America. Most people, not you, because when you're watching this show, you're smarter than that, but most people in America will hear an allegation and say, oh, yeah, that's what he was, shoot him in the head. You don't think too deeply. The fact that Cohn, per Rothstein's recollection, stated that this sex blackmail ring was part of an anti-communist crusade, coupled with Hoover's involvement in the Blue Suite events, suggests that elements of the government, including Hoover's FBI, may have been connected at a much broader level to the operation in a way that transcended Hoover's own personal involvement. Rothstein confirmed his statements to both DeCamp and Collins in an interview with me that was conducted in early 2020. Holy shit. We are very close to modern time. He additionally told me that Cohn had told him that his role in the ring had originally come about because he himself had been entrapped and blackmailed, leading Rothstein to feel some sort of sympathy for Cohn. Now we're in 2020. And the blackmail allegations of having people blackmailed with pictures of underage people or in bed with underage people or sex parties and compromised rigged rooms and photographs and audios That's exactly what Epstein was allegedly doing. It's exactly why people wanted Epstein shut up. And the argument was that Epstein was working with the Israeli government to blackmail U.S. officials, politicians, and to get dirt on them. And so now we have to ask, is this part of what's going on here? For those that may find it hard to believe, that such an operation would take place with the involvement of the FBI director, there are also other related allegations to consider. So if you're having a hard time believing that the FBI director was compromised in America, the FBI director was compromised in America through illicit sex activities or kinks that he had, and he was compromised. If that's hard to believe, then listen to this. American intelligence operatives and organized crime had competed and then collaborated to blackmail Hoover years before Kaufman witnessed these events at the Plaza Hotel. Lansky was credited with obtaining compromising photos of the FBI director J. Edgar Hoover sometime in the 1940s, which showed Hoover in some kind of gay situation, according to a former Lansky associate, who also said that Lansky had often said of Hoover, "I fixed that son of a bitch." Meyer Lansky, widow, also later claimed that her husband had acquired hard proof of Hoover's homosexuality and used it to neutralize the FBI as a threat to his own operations. This is before Kaufman's report that he was into all these things. People were already saying that about Hoover. It was a long-standing thing. The photos showed Hoover engaged in sexual activity, specifically oral sex, with his longtime friend, FBI Deputy Director Clyde Tolson. Photos were allegedly out there of the FBI director having sex with a male longtime friend from the FBI director Clyde Colson. There is considerable separate evidence from the period that close professional relationships between Hoover and Tolson were also intimate, and that this was an open secret in Washington. An open secret in Washington. Everybody knew the FBI director and the FBI deputy director were homosexual lovers, and that was a known thing before the whole Kaufman Blue Suite scenario came in. So again, how many stories can you hear about the cross-dressing, compromised FBI director owned by the mob? Can you hear before and say, "Oh my God, devil's advocates, it's just rumor and speculation by somebody who's already perjured herself"? At some point, these photos fell into the hands of CIA counterintelligence chief James Angleton, who later showed the photos to several other CIA officials, including John Weitz and Gordon Novel. Both Weitz and Novel later shared that the pictures they had seen showed Hoover engaged in oral sex on a man who Angleton identified as Tolson. However, only Hoover's face was recognizable in the photographs. Angleton also claimed that the photos had been taken in 1946. Angleton was in charge of the CIA's relationship with the FBI, as well as Israeli intelligence, until he left the agency in 1972. Israeli intelligence, blackmail on the FBI director. Are you seeing all of it? What are we all hearing that Jeffrey Epstein? Well, I think it's related to Israel. I think it's related to Jeffrey Epstein. I think it's related to what they had on Donald Trump. I think it's related to those Epstein files. No shit. Blackmail has been going on with the Israelis and the whole sex for blackmail scenario for a long time. And it is coming forward into the 2020 area in some of this talk already. Angleton was in charge. Okay, we already got that. Angleton was also a CIA figure who had pushed for the agency to forge ties with Mayor Lansky, raising the possibility that Angleton could have received the photo from Lansky. However, Anthony Summers, in a book, Official and Confidential, The Secret Life of J. Edgar Hoover's book, has argued that it was not Lansky, but William Donovan, the director of the OSS, who obtained the original photos of Hoover, and either he or another person at the OSS or early CIA had later shared them with Lansky. Summers also states that to gangster Frank Costello and Lansky, the ability to corrupt politicians, policemen, and judges was fundamental to the mafia's operation. Summers states, gangsters Frank Costello and Lansky's ability to corrupt politicians, policemen, and judges was fundamental to the mafia's operations. The way they found to deal with Hoover, according to several mob sources, involved his homosexuality. They would get him to compromise himself, get him on tape, get him on video, and now they own the law. Hoover, for his part, was likely already used to the realities of being blackmailed by this point, given that his private sex life had been known to the mob and U.S. intelligence communities for years. He likely saw the opportunity to partake in the scheme as a means of amassing his own massive collection of blackmail. So Hoover, who had been blackmailed, decided, you know what, blackmail is good business. I'm going to start using blackmail to blackmail other people. And in so, he basically got himself some mutually assured destruction. If it ever comes out about my cross-dressing homosexuality, I'm going to have stuff on you because I've learned a trick from you. I learned how to blackmail people. With thick dossiers on friend and foe alike, Hoover's office contained secret files on numerous powerful people in Washington and beyond. So now our own FBI is getting blackmail material on US politicians as well as mobsters and everybody he can, because he's realized blackmail is really fucking important for protecting your secrets. You have something on them, they have something on you, mutually assured destruction. And so begins one nation under blackmail, where everybody's blackmailing each other about the secrets that can come out, and people get killed if somebody starts to break that domino effect that'll just cascade the whole mother effer. I hope that's making any sense to you so far. And not to say that you're dumb. That's not what I'm saying. It's complicated even for me. I'm not saying you're dumb. That's not, I was like, oh, I'm so smart. I've got it figured out. I hope you figure it out. No, I hope we can figure it out. I hope we can connect the dots. I'm not any smarter than you. We're going through trying to connect the dots. Critical thinking skills. Don't just shut out. And again, if you don't follow it, read the book, buy the book, One Nation Under Blackmail. Read it slower if you need to, if you really want to get into it. Hold somebody accountable if you can, if you don't mind having an accident. All right. Even former OSS veterans like Richard Helms have made such claims, alleging that Hoover played a very skillful game with the knowledge of sexual habits of prominent people. So again, Hoover, who himself had been blackmailed with his compromising photos, learned how to blackmail other people, and now he had power because he learned how to use a trick out of their own book. Further evidence for this comes from journalist and author Burton Hirsch, who alleges in his book, Bobby and J. Edgar, the historic face-off between the Kennedys and the J. Edgar Hoover that transformed America, that Hoover had also been tied to Sherman Kaminsky, who helped run a sexual blackmail operation in New York that involved young male prostitutes. Kaminsky claimed to have been New York bred, but federal investigators later learned that he was originally from Baltimore. Some reports claim that Kaminsky had ties to Israel, having served in the Israeli Defense Forces. Again, Israel, blackmail on U.S. politicians and law enforcement. All of it's coming around and around. The Ring, which was called the Chickens and the Bulls by the NYPD, targeted prominent men who were closeted homosexuals throughout the United States, many of them married with families. Among those who had been blackmailed were a Navy admiral, 2 generals, a U.S. congressman, a prominent surgeon, an Ivy League professor, and well-known actors and television personalities. Yes, there was a lot of period where all kinds of actors who were considered very, very strong male figures. We were finding out Rock Hudson was gay and other individuals were gay, and it was a shock. And a lot of people's careers were tumbled during this time when everybody was getting blackmail on the people that are actors that were known for their heterosexuality, later turned out to be homosexuals. And not a big deal other than it was a different time in this country, and that would ruin people's careers. That operation was busted and investigated in a 1966 extortion probe led by Manhattan District Attorney Frank Hogan, though the FBI quickly took over the investigation, and photos showing Hoover and Kaminsky together soon disappeared from the case file. So again, people covering up Hoover's homosexual activities come in and they swoop in and those things just disappear. And now it's in the ether as rumor and allegations. Can't prove anything, sir. That's just complete rumors and allegations. Go have an accident if you keep talking about it. Kaminsky successfully, and again, talking about it, by the way, I want to say, I'm not too terrified about being killed for this kind of stuff because I'm just talking about it, and you're allowed to talk about shit. It's only when you actually have the proof. If I could prove any of this stuff definitively, then you have an accident. That's where you get in trouble. If you can prove it, or if you know who has it and you're forcing them to talk about it, hey, I know you've got it, release it to the public, that's the kind of shit that gets you killed. Just talking about it, just like that DA's conspiracy theorist, whatever. Find something that DA said that's not right and say, that's the same guy who said this. You can't believe anything he says. Dismiss everything. Shit, why don't we just call him whatever name shuts your brain down and blackmail them? That'd be good. It's easy to do that. You don't have to kill somebody. You just have to say, look, until you have proof of something, you're just a talking head who gives a shit. I went on a side rangent. We're almost rangent. I went on a side tangent. I think we're almost done. And then we'll let you go at 1 hour and a half, right? Kaminsky successfully avoided arrest for 11 years, having disappeared from a New York courthouse undetected during his sentencing hearing. He's undergoing sentencing and he disappears during the trial and going to his sentencing and is gone, disappeared avoiding arrest for 11 years before they finally catch up with him. Why would Hoover have been involved with activities of Kaminsky? There are only a few possibilities. One possibility is that Hoover had been blackmailed by Kaminsky, though it's more more likely that Kaminsky instead had ties to figures in organized crime that had already blackmailed Hoover long before. Another possibility is that Hoover was cozy to a second sexual blackmail operation targeting closeted homosexual men because he sought to pad his own library of blackmail for personal and professional gain. I know it gets confusing. It just should be ringing at the top of your head. Wow. The FBI director, it looks like he's been blackmailed by 7 Ways to Sunday, and he's in bed with the mob, and they're covering shit up, and they're blackmailing other people. That's the big picture. Did that just happen? If you can fathom it, then you can start to realize some major problems are going on in this country. And you don't have to name names. In fact, you probably shouldn't if you want to live. What does seem clear is that Hoover was well aware of the power that amassing blackmail afforded and was willing to indulge in the taboo behavior at the Blue Suite because he was no longer concerned about being extorted or manipulated with sexual blackmail in ways that would end his career or destroy his public image. What is that saying? Once Hoover got enough blackmail on other people, he wasn't even afraid to attend the Blue Suites anymore because he knew that if you got something on me, I've got something on you. So he was just like, whatever, I'll do what I want at this point because I've got enough blackmail on other people. I'll end entire careers. I'll put people in jail. I'll have people killed for some horrible thing because all I have to do is tell America some horrible thing about them and they'll go shoot them because that's the way America works nowadays. Anyways, I'm going off on a side tangent. Almost done. I think we're going to end at business as usual. I don't think we're going to, we're not going to go. This is it. This is the end. We're going to end at an hour and a half. All right. He had fallen in love with the very crowd, or sorry, fallen in, not fallen in love. He had fallen in with the very crowd that had reportedly blackmailed him. Hoover had himself fallen in with the very crowd that had reportedly blackmailed him. He learned how to blackmail because he himself was blackmailed and later developed a symbiotic relationship with the same network. So he became partners with the people. He blackmailed them. They blackmailed him. Now we're in bed together. Now we're in partners. Now we can work together. Now the government, the Federal Investigation Unit, the federal FBI can work with the mobs because we got dirt on each other, mutually assured destruction. The most obvious and troubling symptom of this symbiosis was Hoover's reluctance to tackle organized crime as the FBI director. Again, I'm in bed with the mob now. So as FBI director, I'm just going to not actually go after organized crime. Let me read that again. The most obvious and troubling symptom of this symbiosis, mutually assured destruction, was Hoover's reluctance to tackle organized crime as the FBI director. Hoover repeatedly declined to use the Bureau, the FBI, to target organized crime networks, referring to organized crime as a local problem in which the FBI did not need to intervene for most of his nearly 50-year stint. 50-year stint as the top law enforcement administrator in the country. When you have the FBI, the head of the FBI for nearly 50 years, looking the other way about mobsters, because you know what? Mob stuff is just not a concern of the FBI. We're not concerned. Why are you not concerned? Because they've got pictures of you cross-dressing and doing shit that you shouldn't do and can ruin the country. And you likewise have shit on them. And now you're literally and figuratively in bed with each other. So let's just turn the other way. And if the mob has a blanket permission to do whatever they want in this country because they know the FBI is not really going to come after them heavy because they've got the guy at the top of the food chain under their belt and under their direction, then they can get away with murder. Literally, they can get away with murder. According to congressional crime consultant Ralph Salerno, Hoover's apparent aversion to targeting organized crime networks, such as those in which Rothstein and Lansky figured prominently, allowed organized crime to grow very strong in economic and political terms so that it became a much bigger threat to the well-being of this country than would have been if it had been addressed much sooner. That's the key takeaway. Organized crime owns our country in large part because J. Edgar Hoover was a cross-dressing homosexual that was afraid of that shit coming out, and they had blackmail material on him, and they owned the FBI director. And the FBI turned the other way and let mobsters and organized crime get stronger and stronger and weasel its way into politics and politicians, getting blackmail on everyone in this country. And now we are one nation under blackmail. Thank you for listening to yet another episode of the book, One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb. Please buy a copy of the book if you found this entertaining. If you want to read more details, I will continue with my book series until you get bored of listening to my yammering ass talk about it. Have a great day.